Hi everyone, welcome to Living is Dying, session 21, How to Be with the Dying. I'm Zangmo, the host for this evening. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia or whatever country you're practicing from. We recognise their connection to land, waters and culture and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So tonight I was to be joined by 4 people. Unfortunately 2 of them are sick, but I have just a few little notes from both Kirsten, who can't be with us, and also Julie StAubyn. So I'll share a little bit about what they wanted to speak of when we get to those parts. But we do have with us this evening, who I will spotlight later, we have Annie Whitlock, who's been on the program before. She's an end-of-life consultant and has done, I think, all death doula, walker, midwifing trainings that you could possibly do. Has 12 years experience working with people, both dying at home and also in hospital settings. And her purpose is to normalise dying and death. Annie's a funeral celebrant, an advanced care directive facilitator, practicing Buddhist of 40 years, and is on too many committees to list. The other person who will be joining us this evening is Jangchub, who I know most of you know. She's an instructor with Siddhartha's Intent and has been a student of Dzongzar Khyentse Rinpoche for over 30 years. She did her retreat in France and supported the second 3-year retreat at Vajradhara Gompa. And her current emphasis is pastoral care for Buddhist practitioners to assist them through the dying process. So I'm going to start by sharing the text. We'll be reading that, going through that together. And then I'll invite our speakers as we go along. How to be with the dying. What can we do for our dying loved ones, especially if they were not spiritually minded, let alone Buddhist? Will encouraging the dying and the dead to take refuge and arouse bodhicitta really help? And could a non-Buddhist really understand the Bardo teachings? These are very good questions. Rinpoche goes on to speak about confidence and motivation. First of all, the fact that you want to help the dying person, that you are even thinking about them, indicates that there is a spiritual or karmic link between you. How many people, animals or insects are dying at this very moment? Are we thinking about all of them? No. Even though as good bodhisattvas we are supposed to care for all sentient beings, in practice we rarely do. We tend only to think about those close to us. Whether they realize it or not, everyone you have a relationship with must have a connection with the Dharma. Why? Because they have a connection with you, and you have a connection with the Dharma. The fact that you want to help them means they must have some merit. So your dying non-Buddhist friend must have an indirect connection with the Dharma through you, a connection that will really help them. This is how connections work. You may be poor and powerless from a worldly point of view, but at the moment of death, a rich, famous, powerful person who is clueless about anything spiritual will be of no use to your friend whatsoever. Your concern for your dying friends' well-being and willingness to support and care for them is the best news they could possibly have. You may be the only person they know who has a connection with the Dharma and is able to give them the information they need to navigate the process of death and beyond, and to do the relevant practices. So your good aspirations, guidance, and dedication are the only true useful help they will be offered. They are actually incredibly fortunate to know you. With the right motivation, you can be confident that whatever you do will help. Even if you lose your temper because you are overtired or frustrated, it won't be a big deal. After all, who knows what truly helps and what doesn't? Everyone is different, so it's impossible to say. All you can do is offer the help you believe will work best. Create a calm and peaceful atmosphere. If the dying person is in pain and terrified, but unwilling to tolerate spiritual discussion or practices, don't try to impose any of your Buddhist ideas or methods on them. Simply create a harmonious and peaceful environment, and always be honest and direct. The calmer a person is at death, the better. This means that the attitude, bearing and body language of the friends, family, and those caring for the dying person are important, because it's up to them to create a loving atmosphere. Most important of all is your motivation. Bear this in mind when you find yourself overwhelmed by emotion. Instead of breaking down, try to focus on calmly and gently embodying kindness and compassion. Surprisingly, perhaps, non-Buddhists often end up facing death in a calmer frame of mind than many Buddhists. Just because a person is Buddhist doesn't automatically mean they are calm. Someone who is twitchy and agitated, nervous and fidgety, obsessive and unable to let go in life won't suddenly become calm and still just because they're about to die. Also bear in mind that physical nervousness and agitation don't necessarily mean that the dying person is not focused or that they don't know what they should be doing. So don't try to foist your interpretation of their frame of mind on them. If the dying person is a Shravakanayana practitioner, they will try to dwell in egolessness or think about the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. If the person is a Mahayana Buddhist, they will try to dwell in the view of shunyata. A Tantrika will think about their guru as they die, or the names and forms of Amitabha Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, Akshobhya Buddha, Avalokiteshvara, Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, Manjushri, Aryatara, and so on. And at the moment of death, they will think of their personal deity, their yidam. So I would like to share a little bit here. This was one of the points that Kirsten wanted to speak to. And she sent me some notes this afternoon when she was not well enough to join us. Creating a calm and peaceful atmosphere, and remembering that Kirsten is a palliative care nurse who works in hospice. As Rinpoche says in the book, the attitude, bearing and body language of the friends, family and those caring for the dying person are important, because it is up to them to create a calm and loving atmosphere. In my experience, it is important for the dying person to know that their family members, friends, and carers are looking after everything that the dying person is not able to do anymore. There are many tasks that the dying person is not able to do, so the carers need to make sure they protect the dying person's environment by observing and minimising the number of visitors the person has and the duration of their visit. It is often difficult for the dying person to put boundaries in place and to be honest about how many visitors they can handle. So it really is important that the carers can regulate this for them. Guarding their phone and messages. The dying person may not be able to reply to phone calls and messages, so it will be beneficial to have one person who checks their phone and makes necessary phone calls to update their friends and family. When someone is dying at home, it's best to find a safe and quiet space for the dying person to spend time in. As their energy levels decrease, they will want to retreat more and have more time to themselves. Kirsten encourages us to surround the dying person with their favourite things, such as photos, statues if they're religious, and to bring familiarity into their space, whatever that means for the person. Move and act in a kind and confident manner. In my experience, people appreciate confidence and directness, but also a kind and compassionate approach. If a person is in a hospice environment, they will usually allow the family to set up their room and make it homely and as comfortable as possible. When a person dies in a hospital environment, it's beneficial to put a sign at the door that says, "Do not disturb," so any kitchen and cleaning staff aren't entering the room unnecessarily. The nurses may not do any observations of the vital signs anymore because it will only disturb the dying person. Pressure area care may also be decreased as death approaches. And Kirsten reminds us, a person will die the way they lived. It's best not to put unrealistic expectations on the one who is dying. What we perceive as a calm and peaceful environment may not be the same for the person who we are looking after. So it is best to be flexible, act with compassion in every circumstance, and do what most suits the personality of the person who's passing. Going back to the text. Always tell the truth. Till now I thought that only others die, that such happiness should fall to me. Ryoto. And I'll just share something here before we go on with what Rinpoche is speaking to. And this is, again, this is from Julie StAubyn, who can't be here. But she was talking about when she was working in palliative care support as a volunteer, and they would go to families to give people respite. Often families would actually ask her not to say the D word, not to mention death, and to not tell the person that they were dying. So some families were actually choosing not to tell the person they were looking after, whether it's their parents or siblings, that they were dying, because they didn't want them to lose hope and they didn't want to upset them. Seems hard to believe, but it goes on. Rinpoche says, however difficult the truth may be to hear, it is always best to be honest with a dying person. Most of us would rather avoid telling a person we love that they are dying, even when it is blatantly obvious. Often we lie because we don't want to admit to ourselves that someone we love is about to leave us. Hope makes us hide the facts from both ourselves and our loved one. People who never had a spiritual life sometimes imagine that they are the only ones ever to have experienced the suffering of death. Obviously, this is not true. So remind them that no one on this earth has a choice about dying. Everyone must die, including them. It is also worth pointing out that there is no telling which of you will die first. Your loved one may be in the midst of the process of dying, but accidents happen, and as none of us knows when and how we will die, there is no guarantee that you won't die before they go. The thought that is often with us, can I really help? Without being enlightened, it is impossible to be certain whether anything you will do really help a dying person, or for that matter, a living person. With the best of intentions, you may encourage a sick friend to take a particular medicine, but you will never know if it helped or made things worse. Your friend's health may appear to improve dramatically, but in the long run, the side effects could be devastating, or vice versa. But as I have already said, the most important thing about the help you offer is your motivation. If you have a kind heart and a pleasant smile, if you are warm, polite, and humble, and if you genuinely wish to improve another person's life or death, whether they are agnostic, atheist, or a complete stranger, they will appreciate everything you do for them. In fact, they will probably appreciate your help more than the help that's offered by someone who is closer to them, but who acts out of duty, not love. So I'm going to hand over to Annie to share something about helping. I'll just spotlight you, Annie. Beautiful.
The one thing that I'm thinking about right now is when I was with my great aunt, and she was 95. Now, we had been speaking about death and her dying for quite some time, and she was okay with it, and she was curious about it. And on her deathbed, at her dying time, those of you who have been with someone who is dying knows that it can take hours and days sometimes, and it's really hard work. It can be really hard work for the participator and the spectators. And so my great aunt, she had her breathing had started to really slow down. And she'd been like this for about 18, 20 hours. And I was by her side, and I promised her that I would be there. And she said to me, "This is so hard." And before we had spoken, that you don't get usually a dress rehearsal for dying. And I said, "It is, and you are doing a magnificent job. You are doing beautifully." So there was some encouragement, and she died a few hours later. Zangmo, did you want me to talk about the the gentleman in the hospital?
Yeah, I think that would be good. I think it all fits together nicely. These next three sections all tie in together.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I wear a few different hats at this particular time. I was asked to visit a man in hospital as a Buddhist chaplain. He was dying. And when I entered his room, there were about 8 people around his bed, and he appeared unconscious. And I greeted him by his name as he lay in his hospital bed. I always do that. I always speak to the person if they're on life support, or if they have died, or if they're unconscious, or if they're conscious. And I introduced myself to this man. He can't hear you. He's unconscious, said his wife. I understand, I said. And I asked if I could sit beside her, and then asked his family, who were not Buddhist practitioners, if they would like to know how Buddhism sees death according to Buddhist belief. And one important thing was that hearing is the last sense to go. So I said to the family, it's really important to keep speaking, even though it looks like he can't hear you. So let your husband, father, uncle, brother know of the way that he helped to prepare you for life as an adult. Share some memories of the times that you had together, and let him know how you remember the times that he helped people, perhaps those people he never knew. I told the man's wife that she can also keep talking to him, with him. Share the stories of your family, what you've done together, the memories. Let him know that these are the lessons that you've learned. Share some of the funny things. You know, people will often laugh. Just keep talking, not all the time, of course. Then I needed to leave, and I excused myself, saying that I would be going. Martin, I'm leaving now, I told the man from the foot of his bed, and I'm going to pray for you. He opened his eyes. He looked directly at me, and he said very quietly, thank you. This was a perfect example of how we just don't know.
Thank you, Annie. That's such a good thing to be able to share with people. Really appreciate it. I'm aware that you may or may not be staying with us, so if you end up leaving, thank you. If you don't end up leaving, we'll have you here for questions at the end. Thank you so much. We'll continue with Rinpoche's discussion around, should I talk about death? Should we talk about death? Buddha said that of all mindfulness meditations, the mindfulness of death is the most important, and so discussions about death are never inauspicious. In fact, we should all talk about it far more than we do. We will all have to die, so death isn't just a subject for the dying or for the very old. I think we should encourage people to think and talk about death far more than they do. Perhaps we should sponsor giant billboards in big cities and subway stations that say things like, your life is ticking away and every second brings you closer to death. And shouldn't birthday celebrations include the reminder that death is now 1 year closer? If you live among materialists who dismiss anything spiritual as mere superstition, you'll need to be quite skillful about how you introduce death into a conversation. In this human realm, difficult to handle subjects tend to be ignored or denied, so by bringing up the subject of death too directly, you risk alienating those that you are trying to help. Concentrate instead on gently introducing a little general information about impermanence. Point out that impermanence and change aren't necessarily negative. In fact, impermanence is what makes improvement and change possible. Tell them that it's because everything is impermanent that we can change our lives for the better. But before any improvements can be made, we must first understand and accept the impermanent nature of phenomena. After that, you can gradually introduce the fact that life itself is impermanent. Of course, how you approach the subject of death will depend on the person you are trying to help. Materialistic people tend only to care about their own money, their worldly power and position, how their networks and connections can bring them more money and power. Such people don't bother visiting museums because for them it's a waste of time and money. And time is money. They would never consider getting up early to enjoy a sunrise or change their plans to see the sun set, not unless they wanted to impress another rich person by using it as a backdrop for a selfie. So starting a conversation about death or anything spiritual with such a person is far from easy. If you can't talk about poetry or philosophy with someone because there is no money to be made from either, how can you talk about death? All you can do for materialistic people is pray for them. And as Rinpoche already mentioned, start introducing the idea of impermanence. Having said that, many people who appear to be committed materialists can be surprisingly spiritual. They just don't realize it. Having experienced so much of the world in the pursuit of material satisfaction, they have been everywhere, done everything, eaten at all the best restaurants in the world, and so on. When an apparent materialistic becomes weary of the high life, they have a much better chance of becoming genuinely spiritual than many self-professed Buddhists, Christians or Hindus. Often people who claim to be spiritual are little more than spiritual materialists who spend their lives deceiving both themselves and others, and they are the most difficult to deal with when it comes to discussing death in any form of genuine spiritual practice. Although your friends and family tell you that they are not spiritual, if they take pleasure in magical and mystical pursuits like poetry or philosophy, and if they are sentimental and romantic enough to gaze at a sunset imagining it will be the last they ever see, they may well have the capacity to hear the truth. So try offering them a little information about the Dharma, but don't throw it at them. The most precious gift you can give your friends, children and family is the Dharma. Try pouring just a little into their ears, but don't overdo it. And don't ever use the Dharma argument to correct their behaviour. It's far better to wait until someone does something admirable, motivated by altruism, before introducing a compatible aspect of the Dharma as a way of agreeing with and encouraging them. Never impose your beliefs on others. It just won't help. So we're moving on to how to comfort the dying. And again, sorry this is a little disjointed, but I want to share just a small snippet from Julie StAubyn because this is one of the things that she wanted to speak to. And she mentions that in Kyogle there was a palliative care nurse there, and part of what she did to support people who were dying was that she developed an allow natural death form in response to the need she saw for people with end-of-stage illness who wanted to refuse treatment. And at the time there wasn't an option, there wasn't a form to sign. So she developed that, and this particular palliative care nurse would also often be called on when people were really feeling a little bit stuck in the dying process and didn't feel that they could let go. And she would give them permission to die and encourage them and be by their side to do that. So part of her role changed as she saw what the need was. So back to Rinpoche's very kind words. Encourage the dying person to let go of all their attachment and worry about unfinished business, tasks, plans and so on. Not to dwell on thoughts of their loved ones, houses, jobs, or anything that ties them to this life. I have mentioned this before, and it is very important. Advise the dying person to calm their minds and prepare for the next phase by making good aspirations. What kind of good aspirations could a non-Buddhist make? They could, for example, wish for a genuinely good person to run for President of the United States in the next elections, environmental problems associated with global warming to be resolved, more trees to be planted and nurtured, inexpensive solutions to debilitating chronic diseases to be discovered with no nasty side effects, a car to be invented that runs on free, clean energy, leaves no carbon footprint and emits positive energy into the environment. If you know the dying person personally, you will have some idea about what they believe in. Even the worst person in the world must believe in something that isn't harmful, so capitalize on that belief. Perhaps they could aspire for a 2-day working week. You could also try suggesting that the dying person does something to bring themselves fame once they are dead. Perhaps they could donate all their money to erecting the kind of billboard mentioned earlier that reminds the rest of us the reality of death, a reality that we all have to face, or something like that. Ask the dying person if there is anything that they want you to do for them. Ask them what should be done with their money, their investments, property and belongings, and promise you will do your best to ensure that their wishes are carried out to the letter. And this we've already covered before with advanced care planning and wills and making our wishes known. Some people spend their whole lives worrying about their material goods, and they won't suddenly change that just because they're dying. But knowing that you will do everything in your power to carry out their wishes may help calm their anxieties. This is another reason why it's a good idea to tell those you care about that they are dying. If the person is a Shravakayana or Mahayana Buddhist, remind them of the importance of aspiration. Encourage them to aspire to become enlightened, to be reborn with the ability to be of benefit to others and to encounter the right path, Buddha Shakyamuni's path of loving compassion and non-duality. Continue repeating this same message either verbally or mentally, even after the person has died. If the dying person is a tantrika, read the simplified instructions that appear on page 191. If you prefer, you can read from the Great Liberation Through Hearing in the Bardo, or choose any authentic Bardo instructions, or elaborate or simple. And we're going to be going over this in more detail later on. There's also some examples here of texts that you can download and have on hand. Read the instructions out loud to the tantrika as a reminder about what is happening, about what they should do. If the dying person's relatives are Buddhists, they could read an Amitabha Sutra out loud or chant the mantra or dharani they like best. Tell the dying person's relatives and friends that according to the Bardo teachings, their loved one's awareness and perception will continue to function for anything from a few hours to several days after death. This means that the dead person's mind will be able to see and hear what goes on among family after their body has been pronounced dead. This is why traditionally Tibetans had always advised a dying person's family to avoid talking about the will and fighting over the person's belongings. The family is also advised not to give away the dead person's property or break up their collections for as long as possible. So I'd now like to hand over to Jangchub. I'm just going to spotlight you, Jangchub. Fantastic, and if you could unmute yourself, you're ready to go. And Jangchub is going to share some of her experience with you.
It seems like a lot of things have been covered already, but perhaps I could just talk a little bit about some of my experience and what might be helpful. It may be a bit repetitive, but perhaps just coming in from another angle. It depends. Again, I'd like to start first with the idea that the person that you're being with at the time of death, you have some sort of relationship with that person, because you've been seeing them for a while before they actually get to the actual dying process. In that case, if you can, if they're not a Dharma practitioner, you can listen to the person carefully. I think listening is one of the things that we need to really develop in terms of hearing what someone needs. Sometimes just sitting with someone and listening to what they say, you can pick up little cues that they might have some unfinished business or something. I was with someone who I kept noticing that when they talked about their brother, they were a little bit uneasy and they would start to get, a bit restless. And at that time I said, would you like to talk a little bit more about your brother? And they said, it's quite difficult because I have a lot of regrets about the relationship that I had with my brother. And she said, or the lack of relationship I had with him. And we talked about, that we can heal these things by forgiving ourselves for not being able to be present at that time, that our relationship wasn't as good as it could have been, and to kind of, say sorry to that person, even if they can't actually be present, to kind of heal that while they have the opportunity, to listen to people and find out what their regrets are, and to be able to release them from that is a really powerful thing. And just by talking about her brother, I asked a little question sometimes when there was an opening of some of the beautiful times they did share. And I said, maybe it's good to focus on the beautiful moments that you had together and, make a prayer that in the future, when you meet in a future life, that all those misunderstandings can be purified just by a strong aspiration, and forgive yourself and forgive them. Even if they're not present, you can still forgive. And that forgiveness helps them and yourself for kind of making a tendril for their future life and also for yours. If you came across each other again, there'll probably be some tendril and some good karmic situations could develop from just a simple thing like making a heartfelt aspiration and a deep motivation for healing. And I'm using the example of the brother. It could be, a partner, someone that you've been in relationship, your husband or your wife, children. All this is still applicable, to be able to think of all the things that, that we can be grateful. Even if they were difficult things, we can still be grateful. We've always kind of seen that there are things that we learn from some of these difficult situations, and to think that, well, we've gone through this And now we can make aspirations that in the future we'll meet each other with clarity and with loving kindness. So I just wanted to bring that up because, one of Milarepa's teachings was that, not one of the strong points was not to die with regret, and also to use that opportunity with the dying person, if they're still listening, if they can still hear you, to let them know that how much you appreciated them and what they have done for you in this lifetime, and how much value they have been, and that you pray that you will meet with each other again in future life to be able to benefit others, if you're a Dharma practitioner, or just to benefit others in a general good-hearted way. So that's a really lovely thing to do, is that resolving unfinished business. And then to create an environment in a room where Rinpoche mentioned, that people have a certain kind of beingness, and to create, if you know them well enough, you can create an environment that suits that person. Images that perhaps bring about joy for them, maybe their favorite painting, their favorite music, things like that. And for a Dharma practitioner, for one of my Dharma friends, a very close one, she had a teacher called Durga Khyentse Rinpoche, and what we did was, as she was lying on her bed, and a lot of the time she couldn't get up anymore, we put the picture of Durga Khyentse Rinpoche's image on the wall and put a spotlight on it. And during the night, as she was starting to have a bit of trouble sleeping and restlessness, so whenever she woke up, she would see this beautiful image of Durga Khyentse Rinpoche and be inspired to remember her Lama. And that can also be, for a non-Buddhist, it can be a beautiful, serene environment, or something that they connect with, to invoke, a soft spot, something that they can relax with. Then as we go deeper into being with the person that's dying, again, there are so many different ways that people can die. Sometimes it's, with a lot of anxiety. And if they're in palliative care, of course, they get helped with sometimes some substances to help relax. And even with that situation, sometimes one of the things that I've noticed is that if you're sitting with the person in a kind of presentness, in your own meditation or your own stillness of being with them, and when it gets to the point where the person is no longer communicating with voice, but still perhaps communicating with eye contact, and breathing and so forth, at that time you can either do a practice that they're familiar with, or those bardo passages, the short ones or long ones, depending on the person, and depending on yourself as well, what you're feeling comfortable and capable and confident to do, or merely just saying the Shinrasic mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, which liberates the person out of all this, the cyclic existence, and takes them to a pure rebirth. So there are many different ways, but I think something that I've also been aware of is when we're sitting with someone, and even if we're doing their practice or whatever, their mantra, or just being present with them if they're not a Buddhist, being our authentic self, and open-heartedness, and just breathing, just being aware of your own gentleness, your own calmness. This is when you're really getting close to the person, that there's a kind of transition stage. You almost can say it's kind of like they're going in and out of the bardo already, even though they haven't actually died. There's a kind of thing where one can sense that there's a little touching the bardo and then coming back. And during that time, there's a great deal of sensitivity, regardless of how they've lived their life. At that point, to be able to create a confidence in that is really precious. And something that one can do is, when I found, when breathing with the patient or with the loved one, is to actually breathe at the same time that they're breathing, breathing in and out with their breath. And somehow that really helps create a link there that is also very calming for that person. And going with the out breath in a very peaceful way, I've also found really helpful. Being in that vulnerability, in that raw state, with an open heart and without any expectations, because I think Annie was saying that, it can take a long time. And when you're with a person in that dying situation, regardless of, whether they're struggling a bit or whether they're going peacefully, it can take a long time. And you can feel like you're really taking this journey. I had a couple of times where I really felt like I was going into this transition stage as well from time to time. And it's good to, allow yourself to be vulnerable, allow yourself to be raw and touch that place of our what we call meeting our human condition. And also, I like to say that, we have our pets who become more and more in the last 10, 20 years. People have become more aware that their pets are not just, these working dogs or, we've become aware of how animals have got quite a lot of intelligence and intuition, so that when we're doing this kind of sitting with the person or being, and I like to include animals in that, because they become, a big part of our life, and often they've done a great service of just being there. And we hear from time to time how, it's almost like this unconditional love these animals can give to people and healing power. So when it's their time to die, if we can also have that connection with them, is also very, very helpful. And another thing I just wanted to mention was that sometimes we can't physically be, I'm saying be with the person that's dying. Sometimes we can't be in the same room, or sometimes our loved one might require us not to be in the room with them. Please don't feel like you're not with that person. Please, have the confidence for prayer and your connection with that person, that whatever prayers and aspirations you make on their behalf are just the same if you're in another country, or you're next door, or you just happen to have gone out for a drink of a cup of tea and they've passed away while you've moved out of the room, you're not separate with that person any longer, because you've sat there, you've opened up, and you've connected, and you're guiding that person, and you're giving that confidence to that person, that transition into the next stages of being. So I think I'll leave that there, and perhaps there's something else that we can read from the book, or any questions.
What I'd like to do is, thank you so much. I mean, you've raised so many things there. I would like to put you and Annie up together, and we'll open for questions, because it's just such a privilege to have both of you here. So people can put their messages in the chat, but I think it's a great opportunity to ask anything that we would like to. I'm just going to put Annie next to you so you can be partners in crime there. Oh, there we go. Not next to, on top of. Excellent.
It's next to here.
Oh, okay. So please, if people have any questions, now is the time. I guess I know Annie has been involved with, I was interested when you were talking about listening, Jangchub, and how to do that. And I'm aware that Annie's been involved in running some training for medical students on actually active listening. And this was an experiment, because it's identified as something that, is not a skill that all our medicos have. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Annie, while we're waiting for some questions to come in.
I call it shut-upness. And as Jangchub said, just to learn to sit there, and when people actually have that space, things arise. And we're very poor listeners, and many people have never had the opportunity to speak their truth. Even perhaps they haven't even considered it themselves. And I know that sometimes I get a little bit eager, and I have a technique where I bite my tongue just to make sure that I shut up, and I make sure that that person has that time to consider. How many times do we have a conversation, and then someone, as soon as you finished saying something, the person answers straight away, or they interrupt. And at this time, at any time, even nearing end of life or well before that, to be able to sit in silence gives that person some, it's actually like a permission to, you can be quiet too.
Thank you. Thank you. So important. And a lot of the time people will say they don't know what to say, they want to fill the space. So I think the more and more we hear this, that it's actually okay just to rest, to breathe, to connect, rather than having to, inverted commas, do something, because it's not like there's something to fix. We can't fix dying, so yeah.
And
all right.
When I think Kirsten or Julie was saying how people will say, don't tell the person who's near end of life that they're dying. And I've actually been in situations where the person who is dying has told me not to tell their family or their friends that they're dying. I don't want to upset them, but I know I'm dying.
There's a lot of secrets go on.
Yeah, that's really true what you say, Annie, because sometimes, people do extraordinary things for their loved ones. Like I had one lady who, she could have easily gone with palliative care and not had an interfering operation at really the operation that she chose to do. She didn't do for herself. She ended up doing that for her family, because they couldn't give up on her. And wow, what do you call it? No praise or blame. It's kind of just is, people do different things.
Yeah. There's a raised hand, so I'm just going to, unless it's an accident. Aria, would you like to say something? No. Okay, excellent. No, it is an accident. I take that back. All right. Would anyone else like to ask something? Please ask away.
I guess, can I say something else?
Please
The
just
thing,
keep talking. We've got another couple of minutes, so I think I really want to use
yeah,
the time to hear what you have to say and share.
I think, you know, when you know that it's a Dharma practitioner and you have a little bit of like, sometimes you have substances too, like we have dootsie and things like that.
Uh-huh.
And that it's a blessed substance that one can receive from their teachers and that. And sometimes when people's mouths, you know, people get very dry towards the end of, you know, with the breathing, and just a little sponge, and we soak it in a little bit of dootsie and just, you know, not with the alcohol, but just with the water as a blessing, and to kind of not be, if possible, not to be at the end of the bed, but to be up above the waistline of that person. And sometimes even just before the end of the dying process, there's sort of a light tap on the crown of the head. I'm not really that worried about when some people say, oh, you know, it's best not to touch the body and things like that. That really is a more intimate conversation that has to happen between the person that's looking after that person at the time. And that all needs to be pre-arranged with the family and needs to know about all that as well. So there are a lot of different situations. And, you know, we're saying, like, you know, the hearing is the last thing to go, but touch is also something that communicates love without talking. Just a gentle touch, and it can be, you know, in their hand or towards their heart or on the crown of their head, but very gently. Yeah, I mean, it's so different for so many circumstances, isn't it?
I agree. Some people want their hand to be held.
They ask for that.
Yeah.
Or they'll give an indication. Yeah.
And be prepared. You could be holding that hand for many hours.
Yeah.
So, Laria, yes, please ask your question. I thought you said you didn't have one. I'm sorry, I put your hand.
No, it wasn't a mistake. No. Hi. My question is, I didn't have the opportunity to read the book. Forgive my accent, I'm Italian anyway, but you should be able to understand me. We keep talking about preparation when the illness gives us time to prepare, to be there, and to comfort. What can we do as people on the path when, you know, there is an accident, when you see a little animal being squashed on, you know, dying on the side of the street or in the middle of the street or on the beach because someone has drowned? What can be done in that immediacy? If anyone has got an answer, I'll be very grateful for it.
Annie, would you like to say something first?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. You're right, Ilaria. There are victims in car accident. You know, there's murders, there's trauma, there's floods, there's fire. There's so many situations where we may well come across a person who has died. And so what I would do, because, you know, usually you may not have a lot of time, but I would actually speak to that person and I would let them know that they have now died, that they are no more in their physical body. Now no more of the sense of smell, the sight, the sound, the taste. That's gone, and that is as it should be, because you are now dead. So have no fear, and that, you know, I will pray for your safe journey. Something simple like that. That's what I would do.
Wouldn't that, because I live in a Catholic culture that where that is not contemplated, so wouldn't that agitate the person? Because unfortunately we don't have many meditation on death, on passing, except the one of Jesus.
Okay, so we're talking about someone who has already died, and
yes, someone you see, you are in the middle of an accident, or in a, you know, you see someone who's dying, you see a sentient being, an animal, someone who's, you know, when I say someone, can be a person, can be an animal, what can be done?
oh, I wouldn't say it to someone who was dying. I would only say that who had died, who was definitely dead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to add anything, Jangchub?
Yeah, I think it's what we were talking about earlier, is that if you can't be present, or if you come across, you know, someone who's died in the street, then you do the prayers and you make, or aspirations, at that point in time, as soon as you connect with that body. And or hear sometimes, oh, you know, in the news I hear about these people, I don't know them, but sometimes something really triggers and I think, oh, I need to pray for those people. Or there's a situation where a whole family loses, you know, the whole family dies at one time in an accident. And I, you know, I just make prayers for that person and those families. But I mean, you know, and before anyone passes away, you can always say Mani Padme Hum in preparation, you know, whether they're alive or they're passed away. I mean, when I was with one of my teachers, we were driving along on the road and there were people crossing the street, and one of those, you know, to stop at the zebra crossing. And he said, okay, I want you to shout out on Mani Padme Hum to those people. And, you know, my inhibitions were really tested. But I just called out on Mani Padme Hum. I didn't know, maybe Rinpoche could see something was going to happen to these particular people. So that Chinrasic mantra, that Om Mani Padme Hum, so important before someone passes away and after. So very simple, you can remember it, and that makes that connection. In a car accident, if I even see a car accident, Om Mani Padme Hum, you know, a little insect, you know, one flew into my mouth the other day, and Om Mani Padme Hum connection, you know. Yeah. So simple as that.
Okay, thank you
so much. Thank you. So we're at the end of the session, unless I'm just going to check, I don't think there's another question. Lizzie is sharing something, to share a little of my experience. Many years ago, when my late mum was dying with cancer, I used to visit her in the hospital and gently stroke her head and chant the Metta Sutta for her to hear. And that somehow always helped to calm her down and rest from her pain. Even though she didn't understand the chant, it still had an impact. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Lizzie. So thank you so much, Jangchub and Annie. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're going to dedicate. So this virtuous accumulation of merit we offer so that all obstacles dissolve, and at the time of our death each of us may find ease in dying, and swift rebirth in the pure land of great bliss, quickly gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And if the material presented today has raised any concerns for you, suggested you speak to a trusted friend, your health professional, or your Buddhist teacher or instructor. So next week, I'm just going to pop myself back up. Next week we have another very special guest. We're very fortunate with people who are willing to be part of the program. Zenith Virago from Byron, who's a leading pioneer of dying well, family-led body care, ceremony and education. She's known as a death walker, an educator, a celebrant, and she's a wonderful speaker. So please join us next Sunday to hear a bit more about what Zenith has discovered in her many years of working with people as well. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you all being here. I'm going to end the meeting.